so what I'm going to demonstrate, and afterwards you guys are welcome to come up here. I have a whole bunch of different pieces that are going to show how I use different textures in my pieces. When I very first got into jewelry, like I was one of those that I was just, I was a mom, I was working, and I just needed some kind of a creative outlet type of thing. And so I just kind of got playing with it. And at first, nobody ever taught me how to polish anything, right? I never had an apprenticeship. I never had anybody that was a mentor or anything like that. And so a lot of it was just kind of trial and error. And, if you don't know how to polish, you're not ever going to get a polish. And so then you find ways to cover things up, right? There's a lot of sins you can cover under a little bit of texture. And sometimes that works really well, and sometimes you can see that you tried to cover up a sin with texture, right? So the trick is then going to be, how can you do that really well to make it look like it's a thoughtful piece, something part of your intention of making that piece, all right? And then removing textures can also be very difficult. So my friend, Charles Luton Brain, he and I did a video together where we talked about different polishing things. And he said, I always told my students, never put a mark in your metal that you don't want to remove. So if it's going to, you have to be extremely careful. One of the things I learned early on, because again, the way I got started is I went into Michael's. Like my oldest, who will be 25 in 3 days, was 2 years old. And there was this much jewelry in Michael's, right? This is way back when it was scrapbooking and all of that stuff. And so I went in there, and all they had was this crappy wire. The kind that has like the color on it, and if you look at it wrong, the color pops off, right? So if you can, and I did, if you can manipulate that metal with a pair of pliers, good or bad pliers, without knocking off that color, then you've got it, right? And it's going to be the same kind of a concept anytime you use various tools. And so what I'm going to show you is a number of tools that are going to create different effects. So sometimes maybe we want the polish, maybe we want a little soft satin, maybe we want to have a hammered look. Now, let's talk satin, okay? Because satin, that is a finish that a lot of people do. However, the majority, I would say 98% of the people, do not do it properly. Did you know in order to do a really nice satin, you have to go to a fine polish first and then bring it back, okay? And not a lot of people realize that. I didn't realize that. I'm like, yep, give me that 3M radial wheel. Zip, zip, zip. Oh, it looks so nice, right? But in order for you to do it really well, you actually have to take it to that finer polish. And I find that I will do that for a lot of the pieces. Even if I'm going to do a hammered texture, I'll polish it first and then bring it back with whatever else. And if I would encourage you to explore that a little bit and experiment. Try it without, try it with, and you will see the difference. Sometimes it's subtle and sometimes it's not so subtle. With the satin finish, it's not so subtle. You'll actually see the difference. And so even if you take it like something like Zam or Fabuluster, like Fabuluster is both a cutting and a polishing compound, so it's kind of like a little cheat. It's really nice that way. I like Zam, especially if I'm going to be working with stones that are already set. Like I never worry about my Zam marking up my stones or anything. All right, so what I have is I've got a number of rings. And so I'm just going to demonstrate a few different things on the rings with these things, but you can do it. And you guys will see again, like I've got sheet metal, I have, rings, necklaces, pendants, earrings, wire. And so just try it on a number of different materials and see what you think. But like I said, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start really simple. So speaking of really simple, here they are. One of the very first things that I have, and we will get this up there. Give him a second to get that going. So just basic sandpaper, right? Sandpaper is great because you should already have it in your studio, right? In various grids. And if I want kind of a nice polished finish then maybe I will go through some sandpapers that are a little bit finer. So in this case, I have 60 grit. This one is one of those plastic backed, so it's a great wet dry one. Okay, and then I'm just gonna come in and just go in one direction. So notice I'm not going back and forth. Why not? Does anybody have an idea why I don't go back and forth? Okay, when I go this direction, notice everything lines up the same way. If I come back, I'm going to cross. Now, that might be something that we desire. So right now, you can see there's not anything, right? I haven't done that area. Here's this section where everything kind of goes that same direction. So let's see what happens here if I go back and forth. You see how it crosses over a little bit? So it's a little different texture. Trying to move it, there we go. So it's a little bit different because now these kind of cross over themselves. But here's another thing that I really like to do. Work in circles or something like that. And then we start to get more of a Florentine finish where then we start to hit those facets in a lot of different directions. Now this was a pretty fine grit, relatively speaking, 60 grit. But let's see what happens if I use one that's a little bit grittier. Move that, there we go. So you can see how much grittier that one is, right? And this one is on a sponge, and I kind of like that because then I can push on it. But here, and I'm just working in little circles here. And again, I can work in circles, I can work in a crosshatch, I can work in straight lines, and it's going to completely alter the way that this looks. Okay? Now really, I would not normally go right to my sandpaper. And maybe I would if I just knew I was gonna just sand the whole thing. But where these rings are just, they kind of have a matte finish to them, but you see how uneven that matte finish is? All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just gonna take a little bit of polishing compound, and this is kind of like a fabuluster. And I'm going to take a cotton buff. Now, this buff is brand new. Anybody ever work with a brand new cotton buff? You know what it does? It's gonna go, right? So what I'm going to do, there, look at that, I can see you over here. Hi, Courtney. All right, so I'm gonna put this in here. And the first thing I need to do is kind of knock off some of that baby fluff, I guess we would call it. Flex shafts, when I put I never store my handpiece and hang it down, okay? My handpieces always come off. And then they get stored either up here or I actually have a handpiece holder. Sometimes they'll get put on my bench. You gotta be careful because they'll roll off. You don't wanna drop these. Inside right now, it's all nice and aligned. If you ever have your handpiece and it's like bunk, 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 right? It's because somebody's taken it and they've dropped it and it's hit the bench and it's knocked everything out of alignment. And then you get to buy a new handpiece, right? So what I do is I'm gonna go ahead and get my flex shaft going just a little bit until it locks into place, and then I can just push it in, okay? So I need to knock off this fluff before I can use it. So I'm just gonna use right here, my bench. And I usually do this under a vacuum, right? So in kind of like a little vacuum thing, I'm gonna be covered. Oh my goodness. This is worse than the baby puppy. Okay, so now I'm gonna just take this, I'm just gonna load this up. Okay, the first time I really load them up. And then after that, you don't have to load it quite as much. So now, I'm gonna go ahead and just polish here. And I'm gonna put my eyeballs on. I didn't bring my magnifier, so the cheaters are gonna have to do. But look already at the difference, right? And I barely touched it. All right, so this is gonna be, a lot of times, my first step is I get going into this. Now this is not a high polish, it's a nice little polish, and it looks like it's a high polish compared to what I had, but I could take it much brighter and much nicer. Okay, and notice I'm bracing myself here along the bench. All right, you always wanna brace, you don't wanna float, okay? Because if you're floating, one, you don't have as good of control, and you also don't have the same kind of pressure. So I'm bracing here, or I'm bracing my fingers up against themselves to kind of work along all of that. All right, so now I can look at this, and I have a much more even surface to work with, right? So let's see what it looks like now if I take this 60 grit and come in here. And again, this is just the one where I go forward. And look and see if you can see the difference there. See that? And it was just because I put that little bit of a polish on it. And you can see how much shinier this one is than this one, right? And it's a lot more even. So just like when you do, let's say you were going to do a painting, you always put on like that gesso or something like that to kind of prime the area. I put on my makeup, I put on a foundation and then a powder, and then I do the rest of it. You want to put on your foundation first, and that is going to make a huge difference, right? Okay, so that would be my biggest tip. If you guys walk away with nothing else, walk away with that. Now, how do we get some of these satin finishes? Well, you could do this with a fine sandpaper. That's really easy. But there are these little satin finishers. These are my favorite. And they come in different hardnesses, grits, and they're going to give you very different effects. Sorry, I should hold you still. Apologize. I'll try to always pull it back here.
No, you're fine.
So this one, I don't know if you guys can see that or not. You can see how scratchy he is, right? So they're just like Scotch-Brite, right? And so, but they're a little bit more durable than Scotch-Brite. Because I have tried, I'm like, oh, I'm just going to go buy some Scotch-Brite sponges and make my own. Yeah, those didn't work. So it is a little bit of a different composition. And then afterwards, you guys come up and feel all of these things, try them out. And I have some extras up here that you guys can come up and try and play with. Let's go with this guy right here. I'm going to do this one. If you can see how much more dense he is than all of these others? Okay, it's also a little bit more stiff, which means it's also going to give me a little more pressure. Okay, so let me get this guy loaded back up again. And see, nobody's going to guess that I'm not a jeweler. Y'all are going to know. All right. Should have brought one of my quick change hand pieces, but I didn't. Oh well. All right, eyeballs. Okay, so now I'm going to come in here. I love this one. So here's the sandpaper, and there's the matte finish. See how much finer it is? Okay. And again, because I had that foundation of that little bit of a polish, it keeps that nice sheen to it, and it's even, right? So there's that. Let me compare that to this green one and show you guys what that looks like, just so that you see kind of what the different textures are. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to actually put the rings up here on the bench with the items that I used so you can see the differences. All right. This whole getting old thing is for the birds. I'm not enjoying it. All right. And I'm a lot older than I look. Believe me. Again, notice that I'm following that same direction. Okay, and that helps to keep this. So here's where my blend line is. But can you see the difference between those two? So again, it's just like when you use sandpaper. The grittier is going to leave bigger marks, and then that finer or the softer is going to leave a little smoother mark, right? And then however you want to blend those. Now again, I could come in here and I can work circles. And that's going to give it, again, another effect. So if I want a really true, nice matte finish, a lot of times I will work in a circle. And that way I'm not left with the same type of lines that I got from the others, right? So now you can see, hopefully, so right there is where it transitions. It's a little harder to see on that screen, but again, that softer one is going to give us a little softer feel. All right, so I'm going to put that one with these. Now, let's talk about, oh, you guys, these look like little medieval things. They're like wicked. Look at these. Now, you have to be really careful with these. These suckers will tear the skin off of your fingers in a heartbeat. So you have to be extremely careful when you're using these. Now, the thing that's kind of cool about these is you see the difference between the needles on them? That's going to give you very different effects. Okay, the bigger the needle, the more of a stardust effect you're going to get. The smaller the needle, you're going to get back into that matte finish. Okay, and these are wonderful for like backgrounds, and a lot of times I do a lot of engraving work and I do a lot of bright cut engraving, and in order for my bright cuts to really pop, I'll put the texture on there that's kind of a stardust, and then you go through with that beautiful smooth gorgeous line and it's just right in your face. So I use these a lot for like a background texture that I'm then going to put other things on top of. And it's nice because it just sits in the background. All right, so again, let me pop this guy in here. This is gonna be, is he even our thickest? He's not even our thickest. That guy's even thicker. No, nope, black's our thickest. Okay, we're gonna go with him. And again, you want to be very cautious. Keep your fingers away from this one, okay? Now this one, I'm just barely going to touch the surface on it. And I know you're not getting that yet here on the camera, but you will. The other thing, I'm getting flicked with lots of little things. So I would typically wear a mask. Usually I have glasses on, protective glasses, or a face shield. Okay, so you want to be very cautious of that. So look at this though, where we get this stardust kind of effect, right? So let me show you what that is compared to the yellow. The yellow is the finest, so I'm doing the grittiest and the finest on this. Now, what did I not do? Anybody notice? I didn't put my foundation on, so let's do that, because that will help us. So again, just a little bit of polish. There we go. Okay. So now we at least have a foundation. And we're going to jump over to the yellow. And I don't know if you guys can hear the difference or not, but it's a big difference. Okay, so here, see how soft that is compared to that. All right, and then you've got the range in between this. Okay, so it just kind of moves one to the next. So this is a really fun one, but like I said, you have to be extremely careful not to take the skin off your fingers because it hurts. And it'll kill your manicure. Completely gone. For sure on that one. Okay, so we'll put that one there. Okay, so the next one that I want to show you guys, oh, this one. Anybody know what this is? It's a Mizzy wheel. And they are so fun because, again, we're going to get kind of a stardust effect. And, you know, Mizzy wheels, what do we use Mizzy wheels for? We grind suckers, right? We grind off those sprues and get rid of all the extra junk that we don't need. So, let's see here. Again, I'm going to put my foundation on here. Okay, I'm just going to do half the ring on that one. So when I do a Mizzy wheel, again, just like the others, I want to work in the same direction. Okay, so I'm not going to be going back and forth or up and down. This one I'm going to come here on the side. And this is actually a really wide Mizzy wheel, which is kind of nice. And I'm just going to pull it down. And I'm just going to lay that right next to each other, like one mark. Normally I would take a little bit more time because now you see I'm not super even, but you see the effect you get on that? It's kind of fun. Okay, the other thing I could do, I could do it diagonally.
You just have it straight up. I think it does better. Like when you're using the tool, I think it looks better on the screen. Yeah.
Straight up like,
just,
like
no,
this.
when you're just using the tool instead of like facing it at the camera, I think
Okay.
it's a glare.
Perfect.
Okay.
So now I'm going to come back.
Like right there, we can see it there.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, so you see that? So just by changing the direction, you totally give it, again, a different look, right? And so one of the things that I've done with this is I did a whole big cuff, and I went and I did little sections, right? So it's almost like patchwork. And then you can go back in with a graver and like really mark out your sections, right? So hopefully you guys start to see like some of the possibilities and the ideas of that. But that's one of my favorite ones too. Okay. Let's see. Trying to think of which other ones I want to do. Maybe I'll still do it on this ring. Let's do some radial discs. Now, I'm going to pick my yellow one, which I know is like a 60 or something like that. I think. No, is yellow 400? I don't. 80, thank you. 480, 60, you know.
Yeah,
Something. Okay, and then here's the thing too, is that it's not a standard, right? If you're using 3M, yellow is an 80.
Yeah.
But if you go over to Sunburst from Dedico, it's not an 80.
I know, I realize that now.
Right? And that's what's really frustrating because I've got 3 different styles in my studio. So then you have to keep them separate, right? So I wish there was a standard, but usually when you buy a radial disc from a company, they will usually give you a little chart that says what they are, right? And then what I do is I keep them all together, like the whole set together, and then I will take that little chart and stick it on the top or maybe on the inside of whatever my container is, so that way when I pull that little set out, then I can easily see what it is. All right, so again, I'm going to put my little foundation on here just really quickly. And I'm not doing much, guys. It's just enough to get this with a little better base. What's that? Okay, so there's our base. Okay, so again, same type of thing applies depending on your direction. So here I'm just going to go straight up and down. Oh, that's so pretty. I don't know if that comes across on that video or not, but that's a really pretty one for me. Okay, so then let's see what it looks like. Green is pumice. So pumice is like nothing, right? It's the one that gets you into a polish. Now the 3M stuff, like these are the radial discs. I mean, it doesn't even have to be the 3M ones, but the 3M, or good grief, I can English today, I promise. The radial discs I really like these if I'm working on curved surfaces, especially if I have to get inside something. So for instance, like the pendant that I'm wearing, it has a top that's convex and the back that's convex. And so I needed to get inside of that. And these radial discs allow me to do that. So can you guys see the difference there between the two, right? So one was that 60 or whatever it was, and then the other one was pumice. Okay, so you see just like a little tiny change like that will make a huge difference. Okay, so any questions about some of the different accessories for the flex shaft? Now, flex shaft, micromotor, which is better? Any ideas? What's that? Neither. They both have their benefits, right? So we have a flex shaft that's going to have a lot of torque. They're high speed. This is an SR motor from Fordham, and it's going to go up to 18,000 RPM. Okay, so that's, we as jewelers, we really don't need much more than that. And have you all noticed I have not run this full speed? Listen, don't do that. You'll never do that. You're a poor machine. It doesn't ever need to be run that fast, and most of our tools are not rated for that fast either. Okay, I don't know when I've ever used it that fast.
I've only done it on accident as a kid.
Yeah, Kate does it. Kate's good at that. No, so you want to make sure that you're taking very good care of your tools. This is going to have a lot more torque, right? So the next thing I want to show you guys is my hammer handpiece. This is such a fun tool. Oh, I guess I can't put away this number 30. I need to put a foundation on my next ring. So the hammer handpiece is kind of fun. Now there are a number of tools out there that I would suggest for hammer handpieces if you are going to use them. Now Fordham has the hammer handpiece that goes on your flex shaft. Now mine here has a duplex spring, which comes with some problems, or at least not problems, but things that you need to be aware of when you're using it. But it also comes, I'm gonna like scoot in front of the camera, sorry. It also comes without the duplex spring. Now, with the duplex spring, I like it because it takes the weight of the flex shaft off of me, because I'm gonna be holding it like this, right? Now, with that, see this curve here? Well, this is gonna curve too. You should not let this curve more than 30 degrees, all right? And then the other thing too is that you have all the anvil points. Now the anvil points, Kate, can you hand those to me, please? Oh, you got a puppy on you. Of course you do. No, I'll get it in just a second. The little tiny domed one right here. Just a little clear top case. Yep. Thank you. So the anvil points, when you get them, they are blanks. Okay? Most people, and again, because I never, when I started, I was just a hobbyist. I was just trying to figure things out on jewelry forums. I was playing with stuff. I was testing things out. You know, it was all trial and error. And I didn't know you could alter your tools. I didn't know that you could take files to, and that was like a bad thing, right? You don't kill your tools that way. You don't do things like that. And so I finally learned, yes, you do. So these tools, and a matter of fact, most jewelers' tools are blanks. They are ready for you to alter them. When I get pliers, unless it's like a real specialty plier that I know that has already been prepped, the very first thing I do is I take sandpaper to them. I knock off any hard edges. I knock off any surface imperfections they might have. But I never high polish. I would never take my tools to a high polish like my pliers. Anybody know why? Do you know how slippery those suckers are? Right? You take those babies to a high polish, you're not holding on to anything. It's all like right out there. So I will take it to a 400 grit. And that's kind of where I leave mine. Now, when we are working with a hammer handpiece, you have to also be very cautious not to let this go too fast. So we're using an SR motor that goes up to 18,000 RPM. This should never run over 5,000 RPM. Okay? with this machine, it's very, very easy to go past that. And so you can use like a dial control that can allow you to slow down your speed, or you can get an LX motor. The LX motor is a high torque machine. Like this one has some torque, but it doesn't have the torque, that hardness of hitting that the LX motor is going to have. And the LX motor only goes to 5,000 RPM. So even if you floor that baby, you're going to be fine. But you're going over 5,000 RPM, like you can do it a couple of times, right? But it's not something that you want to have be a regular occurrence. That if you're going over 5,000 RPM, you're going to burn out your handpiece. These are only like $180. I mean, if you like to spend that money, by all means. But if not, then you're not going to want to. So this anvil point, you guys can kind of see it. You see how I've altered that, right? So this is one that I use a lot to do heavy bezels. Like I'll come right down on the face of that bezel to kind of flare it out so that it pushes up against my stone. So this one though started out as a square. Okay, so you can see I've just taken it, I've ground it down, and I've polished it. Again, only to about a 400 RPM. 400 RPM. 400 grit. We'll try that again. Thanks. So this is the other one that I use a lot. This is my bezel pusher. Okay, and this one started off flat. I mean, it already had kind of this curved profile, but it was totally flat, had sharp edges and everything. So you can see here, I've rounded everything out, right? Okay, and again, I just did that with sandpaper and files. I have a couple of videos out on my YouTube channel that show how I do this. I think I show 2 or 3 different ways to modify your anvil points. Some of them I love to leave just as they are. So this one is a really fine tip point. Sorry. Yeah, fine tip point. This one I love for the texture. Okay, and there's a couple pieces up here that show that texture. And then this one is very similar. It just is a little bit more rounded. There we go, right? And see, he could use a nice little cleaning or polish. And really all I'd have to do is bring in my flex shaft with that polishing compound, zip, 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 and it's fine. Okay, it doesn't have to be anything big on that one. And again, I use that one for mostly texturing. So the one that is on here, this is what it started out as. I'm just trying to make him earn his keep.
You're good. That's what I'm here for.
He's getting it. Let's move that out of the way. There we go. These two started off as the same thing. So that gives you an idea of what I've gone through to alter that, right? And it's totally fine to alter them. You need to, because people will buy these sets and they're like, it leaves all kinds of marks. Well, yeah, it does, because it's a blank, and that's all that is. Okay, so let's do this. Now, if I try to hold this with my hands, we'll see how that goes. I may have to insert it into my ring mandrel. Now, the thing you want to be very careful with, especially when you're doing rings, anytime you take a hammer, and a hammer handpiece is included in that, anytime you take a hammer to a piece of metal, you are going to start changing and altering that surface. If this item is on a bench block or a ring mandrel, so we've got another piece of steel in here or something like that, now I am pinching in between 2 pieces of steel, and that is going to stretch. So if you want a hammered effect on your ring or something like that, be aware of that and keep that in mind when you're making the piece, that maybe you might want to make it a little bit smaller so that as you hammer, it stretches a little bit. And there's really no way around that. Anytime you pinch metal in between 2 pieces of steel, it's going to stretch, okay? So this arc right here, that's fine. I'm still within that 30 degrees. I'm okay here. I'm going to go ahead and pull this ring mandrel up here, and I'm going to hammer on here. We'll just see how this goes. All right. Now, this is still the one that's kind of flat, so it's going to give me a little different effect. I'm going to get more of a line. Okay. And there is the effect of that, right? And I love this. And you have to do it kind of with a light hand because it's going to bounce on you a little bit, right? And so I want to do that. Now, the thing I like about this handpiece, on the flex shaft, it actuates as soon as I push that pedal. You can see it moving, right? If you're working with the flex shaft, you'll hear that movement, but you won't see anything until you push it. And that will then give it the pressure to go back and forth. So that's on a micromotor. I like that if I'm setting prongs, but I don't like it if I'm setting bezels. I like this one in the flex shaft if I'm setting bezels, because then all I have to do is just bring it to my piece and I can do this, right? Now, I'm trying to control the speed of this with this foot pedal. That's why it's not even, right? Because sometimes it's a little faster, sometimes it's a little slower, sometimes it stops. And that's me trying to protect my hammer hand piece, right? All right, any questions on this part? Now, when it comes to hammer hand pieces, like I said, Fordham has this one, and then they also have the one for the micromotor, but they operate just a little bit differently. With their micromotor, it's kind of nice because when you plug the hammer hand piece onto it, you guys know how micromotors work? So this is my flex shaft, this is my motor here, right? In a micromotor, this is my motor, right? So the hammer handpiece, when I plug this in to a micromotor, the hammer handpiece, it won't go over 5,000 RPM because it limits itself. So there's a benefit there. Not as much torque when you have a micromotor, but you have higher, well, I was going to say you have a higher speed on the micromotor, but again, that won't really apply to your hammer handpiece because that motor is going to limit it. All right. Any questions on the hammer hand piece type of stuff? All right, so there's that one. Then you have hammers. Oh, the hammers. And I limited myself. I only brought, there's 5, 6, 7, 8. Have y'all seen my studio? You guys ever see pictures of it? I have a wall of hammers. It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
It gets confusing.
And everybody's like, do you really need all those hammers? I'm like, yes, they do different things, right? They all do different things. So these hammers, these are particular ones from Frets, and you can see they have different faces, and on each of those faces, you're going to get a different effect, right? So a nice polished one, we're going to get that beautiful whatever. Now, here's the thing you have to know. Anytime you hit something with a hammer, you're going to transfer whatever is on that hammer or that tool, right? So again, make sure you're taking care of your tools so that you don't get unwanted marks. Now, the other part of this too, would you mind handing me those hammers? All 6 of those. Okay. Thank you. You can just grab them all. So I had the opportunity to work with Bill Frets a little bit, okay? And he was talking to me about how people will buy the hammers and they'll put like baby socks on them. I'm totally guilty of that. And he thought it was the funniest thing. He goes, they're hammers. You're supposed to hit them. You're supposed to mark them. You're supposed to file them and polish them and clean them up and alter them. I'm like, your hammers are? Was that?
She used to steal the socks that didn't have matches.
I totally did.
To put on
I
there.
totally did. Yeah, I'm like, well, y'all lost your socks, so I'm going to take them. So these different faces are going to give us different marks. These 3 hammers right here all have a very similar face to them. I don't know if you guys can see those well or not, but they're all rounded, okay? And when you have a rounded face like that, and I go to hit, that metal is going to stretch outwards, okay? It's just going to go out all in the same direction. Now, when I start to use something that has a cross peen, it's only going to stretch in front and in back. All right? And so you can see that if you ever take like a piece of metal and you just hammer like a long strip, you'll see it'll either start to go wide and you'll end up with these little bulbs, or you're going to make your piece longer. All right? But then you notice how also sometimes it kind of bends and stretches like this, right? And that's because as I pinch one area more than another, we're going to end up flaring different things. So it's kind of fun because then you can create all kinds of fun snaky effects just by how you move that hammer, right? So let me show you guys the difference between, let's see. Okay, I'm going to take this ring and I'm going to put it right here. All right. So what I'm going to do, this is just a little tiny cross peen. And you'll notice that I have to go multiple times across in order for me to do this. Now we have a dome on this anyway, so we're gonna have to do that a little bit. But let me show you the difference with a little larger one. And again, because of that dome, I'm getting a very similar effect because only so much of that hammer face is striking that, right? Now, if I take, in this case, a fairly large, I'm not going to do the largest. This is called an embossing hammer, okay? And usually we use it to like emboss our metal, push it down into some pitch or something like that, okay? But here, all right, we get a nice tight hammered effect versus if I use a planishing hammer, planishing hammer that also still has that rounded face, but it's much larger. Can you see the difference there? Right? So just changing the type of hammer you have is going to change that whole look of everything there as well. And then to give you, we'll do it with a really little guy. So I could do this all day long with this particular hammer face, but you know what I do instead? I use my hammer handpiece, right? Because it's going to be about the same there. If I need it smaller, all I have to do is throw this baby in a flex shaft, run it on some sandpaper, and just kind of do this type of a thing, and I can make that size whatever I need, right? And then I can come in. So if I were going to do that whole texture thing, anybody know Alex Boyd, his work, right? So Alex will do a hammer handpiece, and he just goes over the whole thing, and it gives it this beautiful pebbled look. It's just gorgeous. Now, it's going to take you a while, even with a hammer handpiece, but much faster with the hammer handpiece than it would be this, okay? Any questions on those hammers? So here's another thing you can do. So this is a $5 hammer. It came out of the $5 bin at Target, okay? And this is a lot of fun. Now, the way that you do this is I get cutoff wheels. Okay, they're just really, really thin. You have to be careful. They'll break and they'll flip apart and everything like that. So when you're doing this, make sure you've got some eye protection, maybe a face shield or something, right? Protect yourself when you're doing these. But then you get to come in and put in whatever you want, right? And I'll show you what that looks like. Pull out. This is what my bench looks like all the time because I do this. I get done with something and I put it up here. Yeah, anybody else? Please say it. No, it's not just me. There were head nods, so it's not just me. We're the cool kids. The cool kids do this. All right. So, Chucky.
Put their things back.
No, those are like the normal kids.
I don't know. I like them.
We're artists. We work messy.
Excuse me.
So you guys don't know, this is my daughter Kate up here. So Kate is a jeweler as well. She's going into engraving and everything like that. And this is what my stuff looks like. And she has to share the engraving bench with me, and it drives her bonkers. Okay, so if I'm going to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in and just very gently come into this.
There's that eye test you mentioned.
Hmm?
There's that eye test you mentioned. Cheaters don't count.
All right, there's my new line right there. Okay, this did wear down just a little bit. So but you usually buy these, like, I buy them by 100, right? Because they're really brittle, they break really easy, but look at that. Okay, and then I have some metal. I'm gonna just hammer this right up here. to show you what this looks like. It's gonna be loud, sorry guys. That's a lot louder than I thought it would be.
She's still asleep.
So that's not the best, but you can see like what that texture, this is also only 24 gauge. So it's really thin. If it was thicker, then it would have more metal to hammer into, right? Okay, so it starts to get this really fun texture in there. And you can do all kinds of things, like I do stars, I'll do little polka dots. So I can take my ball burrs and go in and create divots. But when you hammer, you have to realize, like, you're not gonna get this beautiful texture that you have here. Because as we hammer, the hammer is gonna move around, it's gonna cross over, you know, you're gonna overlap over the next hammer blow, whatever. So it's going to be organic. Okay, so even if I take something like this that is very, there we go. Okay, it's very organized. It still is not going to look like this, right? We're gonna have little pinpricks all over the metal for that, right? All right, any questions on the hammers? Okay, my next favorite thing I want to show you guys. Cater, hand me those checkering files, please. How many of you guys know what a checkering file is? A couple. Checkering files are a little different. They're also very expensive and sometimes very difficult to find. A checkering file has a very different pattern on it, okay? It's gonna be cut straight up and across. So it looks like little checkers, which is why it's called a checkering file. All right, and this one, again, you can get different effects depending on the direction you take your filing. So here I've got two different, so this one's a cut 2. This one is, I don't know because I can't see that number. It's something very coarse, so probably like a 0. No, show off. So, but anyway, two very different effects, okay? This is a very, very coarse one. And what I will do on this, normally like I have on my bench pin all kinds of grooves and stuff like that, right? But here I don't have that. So I'm just gonna come and just go straight across. Okay, and you can see like how that comes out. Okay, very coarse, and it's really pretty. And again, I already put that little foundation polish on there. So let me show you what it looks like with a little finer one. Now you see that I'm kind of going up and over, and that's because I'm trying to follow the curve of this ring, right? You see the difference there between those two, right? So there's the thick one, there's the fine one. Okay. Here's where it gets fun. When you start to go in different directions. And what happens a lot of times with the checkering file is that your file will find the groove that you went over before, and it will fall into that and just kind of work its way across. So now I'm going to come back this way. And look at that. So the checkering file is great for that. I don't know of any other purpose for a checkering file other than for decorative purposes. And I have 4 of them up here. They're all different grits. And like one of them, you're kind of like, is that even a checkering file? Because it's really, really fine. But again, we would get those nice, smooth textures in that. Okay? Any questions on that one? All right, this is kind of fun, huh? Okay, so another one, Kate. Quit putting the dog on your lap.
I don't put her there. She goes there herself.
You hand me the little drill bits. This one over here, in the little flat case. Yep, thank you. Okay, how many of you guys have ever used the diamond bits? Okay, you want to know, so first of all, diamond bits are going to be fun just by themselves, right? Do I have another one that I already polished up? We'll do it on this guy. So, here's where the diamond bits really get fun. How many of you guys have played with patinas? right? So what I like to do, find my handpiece, is I like to put a patina on the piece, and then I'll remove part of it. And then I'll put some more patina on the piece. Okay, this works really, really well when you're doing silver. Okay, especially if I'm working with like liver of sulfur. Do you guys know what happens when you do that? When you start layering the patina? What do you get? You're nodding your head.
Different colors.
Different colors. You end up with all these different rainbows and these different depths and textures that you can get with that. So, you know, this one's just kind of a little cylinder on here. But again, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in. Okay, we haven't touched that area yet. And I'm just going to, he's a little light for it. But anyway, I just work in little circles, or I'll just do kind of random patterns, right? This would probably be a little easier, not on a ring, but like on my metal. So let's say I pull my metal in here, and then I can come in here. Right? And then you just kind of do these fun, funky patterns. And then I would maybe patina this, and then I would come back in and do either some more texture, or with the diamond bits. Have any of you guys ever signed your pieces? It's not easy. But you can also sign your pieces with the diamond bits. So there's a lot of different things that you can do with that. Now also, because this one happens to be a cylinder, I also have kind of a broad area. So I can always come in and do something like this, right? So you have a number of different things. Use all of the surfaces. More often than not, on a diamond bit, we usually use just the tips, right? We don't use like the whole thing, right? And then, of course, they come in all different shapes and sizes, so you can get into different things. And I like to use this if I want that stardust effect, right? And again, there will be times where I really just want a small section to pop, and then this gives me the ability to have that fine control to just do a small area. Like I don't have to do a whole big piece, but I can, because again, I have that range of tools in here to do however much I need, or as little. Any questions on that? Okay. This helping you guys to give you some ideas? Good. I love seeing the nods. Yes. Then we're successful. Okay. So the last thing, and I'm actually going to come over here and I will show you guys this. I don't have a demonstration for this because it would involve a rolling mill. And do you know how painful it is to ship or carry rolling mills and then trying to find a way to mount a rolling mill to a table like this? So you'll just have to come up and look. And I have lots of videos of how to use your rolling mill to get a good texture. And if you have questions, I have my cards up here. You guys can come and get my card. I'm so hard to find. Like Google.
First 10 pages of Google.
You'll find me, right? So having a rolling mill gives us now the ability to texture up a small piece or a large piece. And here's the great thing. It doesn't even have to be expensive. You guys know Durston just came out with their economy mill for under $400. It is beautiful. It's so lovely. Okay, and it's got a nice wide roller. It's like 80 millimeters. So you've got plenty of space there to work with, right? So that's kind of nice. Now, what do you use to texture? Everything. Don't use anything wet. Don't use rubber bands. I learned that one. That was a bad one. Don't use rubber bands. I thought it was going to be cool. It was not cool. I spent a lot of time cleaning my rollers. Don't use anything wet. So use plants. They are wonderful, but only when they're dry. Some of the fun things that I really like that gives a really beautiful, soft, subtle texture, rice paper. Beautiful texture is rice paper. Or you can do vellum paper. Okay, so that one's a nice one. That one's going to be so subtle, you're like, is there anything there? It just gives it that nice, soft, matte finish. Okay, as far as this goes, and you guys come up and look at them, feel them, touch them, and you guys can see how deep the impression is on these. These came off of paper impressions. Okay, now you do have some that are metal. Okay, the metal plates are wonderful too. These are gonna run you probably anywhere from $80 to $125. But they're gonna last you for a long time. The best ones in the world are by Roberta Peel. Okay, she's Oregon Trail Silver. She's now based in Montana. They were in Oregon. It's Oregon Trail Silver. They moved to Montana, but hers are beautiful. Other ones, and I've got Gwen's cards up here, is Rolling Mill Resources. You wouldn't think that you would get that good of an impression off of paper. These I use 3 to 6 times. If you do it right, they're gonna last you for a couple of times. As long as there's a tooth to it, I can use it. If there's no longer a tooth, then it's like, okay, toss that one. You can buy some that are brass, that are already imprinted, and I can usually get 2, 3, 4 impressions out of those. And then I just cut those up and use them in my jewelry, right? So you have a lot of options. One of my videos shows you how you, okay, cupcake wrappers. You know those little wrappers that you put, do you know how thin those things are? They give you the most beautiful impression. Okay, it doesn't have to be much. Now, how much pressure you give it and how, do you put a little spacer on it? That's where you're gonna turn to those videos. Go look at that and see how that is involved. Other techniques that I'm not showing today is engraving. Engraving is a great way to put surface textures. That one's going to involve a lot of skill. Come back tomorrow at 4 and I'll show you how to do engraving. So that is gonna be tomorrow's, and that is our presentation. So thank you guys for coming.